Hey listeners, welcome back to this episode of Spectacular Science. I'm your host Akshay. Have you ever wondered about what physical and chemical changes are? Well, let me tell you this, they happen all around us in the world, and they might even be happening right now in your home. Well, in this episode, I'm going to take you on a deep dive into the science of these different types of changes, the difference between them, and give you a few examples of why they happen. Let's get right into it. So let's start off with a brief overview of physical and chemical changes. Physical changes are the changes in the physical characteristics of an object. Chemical changes are the changes in the molecular compound of an object. They're actually really different, so let's break it down a little bit. Physical changes are changes like size, shape, or even color or texture. They're basically the physical objects, the changes that you can see with your own eyes, or even feel with your hands. But chemical changes are changes in the molecular compounds. These compounds are very microscopic, so you can't really see them with your bare eyes, but if you zoom in, they're molecules and atoms. Molecules and atoms make up almost everything in this universe, and they are what play the role in these types of changes. Well, chemical changes actually change the molecular compound or the tiny little pieces inside of that object. An example of that would be baking, and chemical changes aren't usually reversed. They can't be reversed because the chemical compound inside itself is changing. But with physical changes, you can probably reverse them in some way. It might take some time or even lots of work, but you can eventually reverse physical changes. Let's look at some examples of physical and chemical changes. Examples of physical changes include painting a wall, crumpling out a piece of paper, or even writing on a piece of paper. These are all examples of physical changes because they can eventually be reversed because they're not changing the compounds of it, they're just changing the look of that object. Now, what about chemical changes? Well, a few examples of chemical changes are baking a cake and cooking because those actually change the molecular compounds inside. And there can also be other things like burning something. This changes the chemical compounds inside because the fire is heating everything up. So if you see something that's heating up or anything like that, you can know that it's obviously going to be a chemical change because it's changing those molecular compounds that we talked about earlier. Here are some ways to identify if it's a physical change or a chemical change. This can be used in the real world because you'll see so many examples of physical and chemical changes all around you. Well, physical changes are changes in texture, temperature, or even state of matter. An example of that is water freezing into ice. Even though it's not exactly water, it's a change of the state of matter, which is solids, liquids, and gases. So all forms of water changing are physical changes. Great. Now let's look at chemical changes. Chemical changes can have a lot of different things, but mostly you should look for gas being formed or even the texture of the object and what it looks like. That can also change because these chemical changes can change the entire appearance of an object or it can even create a new material. Example is burning a candle. When you burn a candle, you're left with this liquid wax. But then it's also a physical change because it can re-solidify. So let's look at some examples of chemical changes and what you can see, and that will tell you if it's a physical change or a chemical change. In chemical changes, there's usually a change in temperature, change in color, change in odor or the smell of it, and formation of precipitate or some leftovers of that chemical reaction. And there could also be formation of precipitate. Precipitate is basically the things that are left over after a chemical reaction. A great example of that is baking soda and vinegar, the most common chemical reaction. We all know what happens when you mix baking soda and vinegar, it fizzes up. But what's left over after it? Well, there's this kind of gunk that's left over, and that white gunk is actually the precipitate of the reaction. These are different ways that you can tell these different types of changes apart. Physical changes versus chemical changes. Let's play a little game to find out if you know the difference between physical and chemical changes. I call it physical or chemical. Let's get right into it. Our first question is crumpling up a piece of paper. Is that a physical or chemical change? If you said that was a physical change, you're right. It's a physical change because it's changing the physical properties of the paper. Alright, let's get on to the next question. Is this a physical or chemical change? Baking a cake. I really like this one. It's so tasty. If you said this is a chemical change, you're right. It's a chemical change because it can't be reversed, and it has chemical reactions going on inside when all the ingredients of the cake are exposed to heat. Alright, our last question in this game show. Physical or chemical? Scribbling on a piece of paper. If you said this is a physical change, you got it right. This is because it doesn't really change the chemical compound, because if you scribble on a piece of paper, you can eventually erase it off, and it's always reversible, and it's changing the color or maybe even the texture of the paper. Great job! Thank you so much for playing physical or chemical. Alright, let's review what we learned in this episode. A physical change is a change in the physical properties of an object. An example is crumpling up a piece of paper because it changes the texture, temperature, or even color of this object. It doesn't really affect the chemical compounds of these objects. A chemical change, on the other hand, creates a whole new substance, and it affects the molecular pieces, these teeny tiny itsy bitsy pieces of everything around us. And these molecular changes create a different object, and these chemical changes can't really be reversed. Now, these chemical changes can produce bubbles, or change in temperature, or even precipitate, which is the leftover pieces, and it produces gas. These are a few telltale signs that it is a chemical change. While a physical change is changes in what you see or what you feel in that object. Physical and chemical changes happen everywhere around you. See if you can find some physical and chemical changes around you in the world. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Spectacular Science. Spectacular Science is produced and hosted by me, Akshay Raman. The music in this episode is by Charan Ramachandran. Please visit spectacularsci.com, my podcast website, to find interactive activities, articles, and blog posts. That's spectacularsci.com. Also subscribe wherever you're listening right now. It really encourages me, and you can get up to date on all the episodes. Subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. It really means a lot. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Spectacular Science next week. Bye!